Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister. Chris Diana, Counsel for the OPP. Just bear with me for a moment while I set my timer. All right, perhaps, Mr. Clerk, if we can start by bringing up document ssm.nsc.can 50625. And while this document is coming up, Prime Minister, it's the transcript of your call with the premiers to situate you in time and place, which I believe was February 14th in the morning. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, if we can turn to page 6, please. Scroll down a little bit. All right, where it says PM, on the second line down, I'm just going to read it out. It says, on a personal note, everything I've heard about RCMP and OPP have been excellent. OPP Commissioner regarded very highly by federal officials. Windsor operation was outstanding. We'll continue to collaborate. So I take it that that's what you were hearing from your senior officials, that the OPP had been very effective to date?
Yes, and I would have mentioned, you're always looking for positive things to say in these FMMs where sometimes there are contentious issues, but that would have been the understanding I had of the previous days. It may not have held from the very beginning of the protest. I won't speak to that, but at that moment, yes, that was what I was hearing from officials.
And that would have been in accordance with your own personal views over what you had seen in recent days happening in Ontario in any event, right?
Yes, that there was progress, yes.
And I take it that your government had full confidence in the OPP to discharge its policing responsibilities within the province of Ontario?
It is not up to the federal government to determine who is policing. So it's not up to us to have a confidence in the OPP to execute provincial responsibilities.
No, but my point is and this is not a call where the media was on, this was you were talking to the premiers and you, without prompting, brought up the OPP and the OPP commissioner. So I take it that your government was satisfied with what it had seen at the time of that call with the OPP.
I was prompted because the Premier was talking about the OPP before, so it wasn't entirely unprompted, but I was happy to say yes. I'm not trying to argue about it. Yes, things seem to be working well at that point.
Right, and because by that point, and we've established earlier in your evidence that the Ambassador Bridge had been fully open to traffic, correct?
Yes.
And that was an OPP-led enforcement?
If you say so.
And we also know at that point, I think you testified that you were aware that the OPP had sent subject matter experts to lead the integrated planning team in Ottawa?
Yes, I knew that they had sent experts to support in Ottawa.
Right, and they were working with other police services, but you may have heard some of the evidence of Carson Party, who was leading the exercise from the OPP, correct?
I hadn't, but I'm sure that's true.
And you also mentioned some other areas of difficulty in Ontario. You mentioned the Blue Water Bridge. You mentioned Fort Erie. Those are the other areas the OPP was actively engaged in, correct?
I assume, yes.
And to your knowledge, there was never an occupation or a blocking of either of those crossings?
I believe there were slow rolls headed towards one or both of them at one point. There was chatter about people moving from the Ambassador Bridge to one or two of the others, but I don't believe those, I'm quite sure that those blockades never actually fully materialized.
Right, and the OPP were actively engaged in those movements, correct?
Yes, both before and after the invocation of the Emergencies Act.
Right, now in that context where the OPP is active across the province of Ontario, you would agree that OPP Commissioner Carrick could have provided valuable input on what tools might be useful under the Emergencies Act?
I'm fairly certain that the OPP did provide inputs. We, as a federal cabinet, got our inputs through the RCMP, but part of the RCMP's role was to inform us on suggestions and requirements by all other police organizations as well.
No, and fair enough. And you may not have heard the evidence. Both Deputy Minister Stewart and Commissioner Lucky thought that the OPP had been consulted, but in fact, they had not been. And I guess what I'm putting to you is the notion that if we're dealing with the question of either necessary or useful tools, if a protest is happening in Ontario, it would be a good idea to seek some input from the OPP, correct?
it would not be up to me to call the OPP. It would not be up to the necessarily even a federal minister to do it. Our expectation, my expectation certainly would have been that it would be for the RCMP to work with their fellow police organizations on coordination. And I would have assumed that that was done.
Yeah. And that could be done quickly from commissioner to commissioner, correct?
Yes.
And for purposes of transparency, and Commissioner, I understand I've hit my 5-minute mark, and just for my last question, for purposes of transparency, we know that there is a consultation record, as we've seen here when you talk with the premiers, that there should also be a written record of consultation with law enforcement so that for accountability purposes, when we go back and take a look at the circumstances in terms of the tools, that there's no ambiguity about what was needed or what tools might be useful. Would you agree with that suggestion?
I know the Commission will be reflecting on suggestions on how to move forward in future emergencies.
So you would agree with my suggestion then, correct?
It's not up to me to agree with what needs to happen in the future.
Okay, but you wouldn't disagree then?
I think more consultation is good, but understanding that in an emergency, one needs to move quickly.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.